If you've heard of Pokemon, you've heard about shiny Pokemon. Alternate colors of fan favorite designs that are just a bit harder to find. In today's video, I'm gonna look at the iceberg of knowledge pertaining to shiny Pokemon and see how far down I can get. Starting at the very beginning, I think it's safe to say that everyone knows that shiny Pokemon are rare. A 1 in 8,192 chance. However, did you know those odds were sliced in half starting in Generation 6? And with the introduction of a shiny charm in Black and White 2, shiny Pokemon over time have just gotten more and more accessible. Not to mention that there are free shiny Pokemon available to catch in the Gen 2 games and in Pokemon Legends Arceus. Even without going to your favorite redacted online website, finding shinies is as easy as possible. Every passenger ship passing by this shiny iceberg knows that. It's plastered all over the top as clear as day. I'm here to dive a bit deeper and discover what's beneath the surface of this iceberg. If we hop into Generation 2, where shiny Pokemon were first introduced, we discover that shininess is quite different from what we expect from the modern games. In these early titles, shininess was a rare event, yes, but it was also hereditary. Pulling from real-world examples of melanistic and albinistic animals, shininess was based on a certain hidden stat spread to determine whether or not they looked different. This resulted in shiny Pokemon being bad competitively, but also meaning that once you got one shiny Ditto, you could shiny however many Pokemon you wanted with a reduced 1 in 64 odds. Starting in Generation 3, these hidden stats were completely overhauled, as well as the Pokemon shinies being related to them. However, reduced breeding shiny odds were reintroduced in Generation 4 with what fans call the Musuda method. Since Generation 4, if you breed two Pokemon with different countries of origin, their offspring have a 1 in 1,639 chance of being a shiny. Perhaps this is a callback to Generation 2, or just a way to encourage fans to use the online trading system, but the Musuda method of shiny hunting has been a staple in every game since, reduced to a 1 in 1,366 odd starting in Generation 5. That's not the only reduced shiny method of hunting in Generation 4. These games also introduced the Pokeradar, and if you got a chain of 40 going, you would have a 1 in 200 chance that a Pokemon would be shiny whenever you charged up and used your Pokeradar. Pokeradar chaining itself took a break for a generation before coming back in Gen 6 with a plethora of changes. Not only were the chances of finding shiny in general doubled, reducing odds by half, but multiple shiny hunting methods exist. The Friend Safari, chain fishing, Pokeradar, even horde encounters are all ways fans use to hunt in these games, excluding a traditional soft reset or random encounter. And since Generation 6, every generation has had its own unique shiny method to use. Generation 7 introduced SOS battles, where if you got a chain going long enough, your odds are stacked to a 13 out of 4,096. Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon introduced Ultra Wormhole hunting, where a select number of Pokemon could have a shiny rate increased anywhere between 1% and 36%. Generation 8 introduced Dynamax Raid Adventures, which gave players an increased odds of finding shiny legendaries with a 1 in 100 chance. The Let's Go games have chaining nonsense and lures, while outbreaks and massive mass outbreaks all increase odds within Pokemon Legends Arceus. And now we've arrived at Generation 9, which not only shows overworld shinies when they spawn, but also have outbreaks which can decrease the odds when knocking out 40, but also introduce sandwiches, which if you build like you work at a satanic subway, can reduce your odds even further. And those are just the commonly known methods. Of course, with increased access to shinies, Game Freak also felt it necessary to lock the shininess of certain Pokemon, and these tend to typically be legendaries, as Game Freak wants to hold on to these shiny forms until just the right time comes where they can distribute the shinies around in an event. but some Pokemon are shiny locked in order to prevent unfortunate scenarios where a Pokemon is shiny but you cannot catch it. A double-edged sword that many hardcore shiny hunters tend to love. But don't you worry, gift shinies still exist. Back in Black and White 2, if you defeated Banga in post-game, he will gift the players a shiny Dratini or shiny Gible. In Generation 9, players can receive a gift shiny Munchlax if they complete the Ogre ousting minigame on hard difficulty. On a related note, back in Generation 2, in the international versions of the games, if you talk to the daycare owner, you'll receive an odd egg which will hatch into one of the new baby Pokemon with a 14% chance of being a shiny. However, you don't necessarily have to hatch the egg to see if it's shiny. In Pokemon Stadium 2, Pokemon eggs will have a different model if it belongs to a shiny Pokemon, for anyone spending an enormous amount of time breeding in those games. But let's reel ourselves back in for a bit. There's still some hunts that we haven't even touched upon within the modern games. In Scarlet and Violet alone, there are some spicy hunts that more avid hunters will attempt. We'll start with the obvious 1 in 100 special form chances for Maushold and the Dunsparce. Each of these Pokemon have a special form which, when stacked with the odds of shiny hunting, creates a perfect storm for a chase shiny. However, at least in the Dunsparce's case, there's a way to reduce those odds. If players transfer up a Dunsparce from Generation 3 or 4 that has a hardy nature and Serene Grace as its ability, the chances that the Dunsparce will evolve into a 3-segment Dunsparce is very high. Most players will radar chain Dunsparce in a Gen 4 game and transfer it up to increase their odds of giving that elusive 3-segment shiny form. But there are a few rare hunts in Scarlet and Violet where the overworld shininess is hidden. Ditto, the Zoroark line and Minior all hide their true forms and won't show if they are shiny. So, most people just eat a sandwich and go on a killing spree with their partner of choice. When the second part of the DLC, the Indigo Disc, was released, people found a more optimal way to hunt these types of Pokemon. Skipping over the minutia, in Scarlet and Violet, typical initial spawns cap at 15, but whenever there's a 16th Pokemon, that means a shiny has spawned. This is all due to a random coding decision to treat shiny spawns differently than all other Pokemon spawns. So hunting for that sweet 16 is the easiest way to go after these confusing hunts. Staying on the Switch, initially there was a lot of confusion about the 2 different shiny sparkles that appear in the Gen 8 games, the traditional stars and the square shinies. Thanks to community members' works and this helpful post by a Hollow Nest survivor on Reddit, the methods to how these shinies are generated is made clear. In Sword and Shield, there are basically 2 methods of shiny hunting: random overworld encounters and the Masuda method breeding. Without going into too much detail, star shinies are more common in breeding, while square shinies are more common with overworld random encounters due to how Pokemon encounters are generated within the game, which is why most shinies I have in this game are stars, because breeding is far by the easiest and most common method of shiny hunting in these games. Sticking on this egg train, did you know that shiny Pokemon through breeding is seeded in Generation 7? This led to the development of the Magikarp breeding method, where players would breed a fast Pokemon to hatch, like Magikarp, through the Masuda method. Check for when you hatch the shiny Pokemon while shaving occasionally, and once you nail down which egg would be shiny, reset and breed for your actual target Pokemon, and once you reach that egg, Eureka! Guaranteed shiny Pokemon. And while we're sitting so cozy on this level, you may notice a handful of videos discussing lost or changed shiny Pokemon that existed in earlier generations of games. Of course, these are all my videos, so if you're interested in seeing some of the best shinies that were lost to time, be sure to save it to your watch later. We're about done with this layer and need to go diving a bit deeper. Here, we find that competitive singles before Generation 9 had a complicated history with whether or not the shiny form of a Pokemon was optimal. This is due in large part to event distributions giving better moves to non-shiny or shiny forms. Famously, shiny Entei was the better version of Entei until Generation 8 because of the event that gave him both Howl and extreme speed. And since Pokemon battling is all about the information game, arbitrarily choosing to make your Pokemon shiny or not could potentially give leagues of information to your opponent about your moveset and game plan. There aren't too many Pokemon that have special signature moves. Moreover, there's even fewer that have a shiny variant of signature moves, but here's at least 3 that do. In Pokemon Sun and Moon, shiny Blacephalon's Mind Blown will change color to match its shiny variant, while in Sword and Shield, shiny Dragapult will launch shiny Dreepy for its move Dragon Darts. However, since the change for the animation in Generation 9, these little guys don't get to fly anymore. But instead we get Golden Syrup for Diplin's and Hydrapple's signature move, Syrup Bomb. So far, we've been talking about shiny Pokemon that anyone can catch. However, there are famous hunts for shiny Pokemon that the player will never be able to catch no matter what. These uncatchable tutorial shinies are typically shiny locked in modern games, but starting back in Generation 3, any tutorial Pokemon has the potential of being shiny, the most famous of which being the Zigzagoon and Poochyena that attacks Professor Birch in the beginning of the games. In Generation 4, players have a chance of meeting an uncatchable shiny Starly, while in BDSP, there's also a chance for a shiny Bidoof in the catching tutorial. Gen 5 takes the setup a step further, with the Pokemon Professor Juniper sends out having a chance of being shiny in the intro, as well as the tutorial mons Lillipup and Purloin. Some shinies people hunt just have incredibly hard catch rates. And no, I'm not talking about legendaries you can easily chuck a Master Ball at. The infamous Safari Weekend forces players to hunt in the Safari zones where catching Pokemon is notoriously difficult and tricky. Other events that players regularly take part of that pushes their shiny luck and patience to the test are shiny badge quests, where players catch a shiny before challenging every gym. Rumble Weekend, where players hunt in the Wii version of Pokemon Rumble. And speaking about these spin-off games, the original Pokemon Rumble isn't the only spin-off with shinies to hunt. There's Pokemon Quest, Pokemon Sleep, and Pokemon Mystery Dungeon, which all have different odds and methods for getting shinies within their games. But that's only getting towards the bottoms of this iceberg. Though I don't know everything, there's some things I know in the dark depths of this ocean, and that includes the controversial topic of RNGing yourself a perfectly competitive Pokemon. I won't touch upon this topic much further, but I will let you know that RNG manipulating a Pokemon to be shiny is a different technique than just hacking a shiny, and people who RNG manipulate tend to find communities that care deeply about their Pokemon games. And speaking of games that are so well beloved their code has been torn to shreds, here's Generation 1 and 2, returning to say that there's some wacky things you can do with shiny hunting between these games. Unlike every generation after, Gens 1 and 2 have a weird trading situation. This is probably due to the fact that Game Freak legit thought these were going to be the last Pokemon games, and let players freely trade Pokemon back and forth willy-nilly. Since these games were built from the same base coding, it was also possible to trade a Pokemon to Generation 2 and discover that they are actually shiny. However, due to a coding error preventing certain spread of stats, wild Pokemon cannot be shiny from Gen 1. Only certain static encounter Pokemon have the chance. But if you use the fossil conversion glitch, you can generate a shiny Pokemon if their dex number is between 1 and 250. Of course, Generation 1 and 2 are a whole can of worms that can be dug through for ages. But I don't really particularly like worms, so I think that's my fail for today. Instead, I'm going to go look at these rare mythical Pokemon that can be shiny hunted. I'll start with the most accessible one, Celebi on the 3DS Virtual Console version of Crystal. However, there are a couple other mythicals which are a tad more difficult to hunt. Jirachi from the $100+ bonus disc is shiny huntable, giving some hopping between save files. And so is Manaphy from the Pokemon Ranger Extra mission, in which through a similar method of hopping between the initial game you gift it to and new save files where you hatch to see if it's shiny, you can also legitimately shiny hunt. Until a year ago, this shiny hunt was nothing more than a playground myth. The rare shiny costumes in Pokemon Battle Revolution exist and are obtainable by the player if it's the first time you defeated the Coliseum leader. Not only are there shiny costumes to obtain, but you can and will encounter shiny Pokemon on computers' teams if you play long enough. The catch? Yes, you can obtain shinies in Battle Revolution if you play at the Gateway Coliseum, which uses rental passes. The other catch? You can only get the shiny Pokemon if your opponent decides to bring it to battle and you beat them with their weak rental Pokemon. However, you at least have a chance to make a full rental team of shiny Pokemon. In Generation 3, you can encounter shiny Pokemon in the Battle Frontier, but you don't get to keep them. Due to how Pokemon are generated, in every single battle facility, it seems players have a chance of encountering shinies on trainer teams and wild Pokemon on certain game modes, all uncatchable. Even in Generation 4 Battle Frontier, where they attempted to fix this issue, random shinies are a possibility that very few players are unlucky enough to encounter. Speaking of shiny locks, originally Shadow Pokemon weren't meant to be shiny. Of course, many people believe that in the original Coliseum, if you find a shiny Pokemon and purify it, it will lose its shininess. That's just a myth though. Shiny Shadow Pokemon will stay shiny because stats are not rerolled when Pokemon are purified. But when a sequel came around, all Shadow Pokemon were properly shiny locked. Meaning that if you want a special shiny Shadow Boy, the only game you can accomplish that in is in Pokemon Coliseum. And here, at the end of the Iceberg, are hunts for shiny that shine but don't look any different. These shiny hunts are far and few in between, but exist on the Nintendo 3DS. In the rarest demo, it is possible for your starter you choose to be shiny. However, this shiny is locked to demo since the Pokemon you can choose to transfer to your actual copy of the game is a completely different generated Pokemon. The other infamous 3D shiny that don't shine is the Hat Pikachus in Pokemon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon. However, these guys only shine because Game Freak dropped the ball and improperly implemented a shiny lock on them, leading to the chance that these guys can have a little shiny star indicating that they are sparkly. And I think that's as far as I'll go in my dive of the shiny Iceberg today. I definitely missed some of the deeper stuff out there. Be sure to let me know any other random facts about shiny Pokemon that I didn't touch on, and if there's enough, I'll be sure to make another video about it. Otherwise, that's it for this video. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next video. Bye!